I was born in Beirut in 1983, and we lived there for a year until we were evacuated because there was the war going on at the time. So we left and ended up in France. And it's weird because in Paris there was this whole kind of transplanted community from Lebanon. We ended up there, and I stayed there for 8 years, and then I moved over to London, which is where I've been ever since. So really I call London home, but moving around like I did as a kid kind of gave me this footless, non-belonging attitude. I'm also a mutt because I'm half Lebanese, I'm half American. I don't know, I think when you move around and you don't have that one place that you call home, you don't have that village where you grew up and that tree where, you got your first kiss or whatever, it just kind of makes you question everything around you. And you can either let it mess you up or you can make it work for you. A lot of my friends who come from similar backgrounds, some of them kind of begrudge it, because they feel like they've been cheated out of belonging to something or to somewhere. But I kind of came to terms with it early, and I came from an eccentric and colourful family, so that kind of compensated for not having my special village. So, yeah, questioning everything around you is good. It's very good fodder for a writer of any kind, for anyone creative, really. I think it gives you, makes you less complacent, and I think complacency is very dangerous for any kind of creative person. I think my first musical memory has to be, listening to Joni Mitchell records in our apartment in Paris. I was obsessed with that song, Raised on Robbery. Raised on Robbery? Because that's how she sings it. I don't know why I say it like that. Yeah, that Raised on Robbery song. Yeah, miming to Joni Mitchell. I used to think, doing little kind of interpretive dances to it. I grew up listening to a lot of music. Everything from Arabic music, Egyptian stuff, to flamenco music, to a lot of Dylan, Joan Baez and Joni Mitchell, right through to a lot of French stuff like Serge Gainsbourg with all his women and all his baby pop projects like France Gall, right through to Jane Birkin. As far as rock and pop, more mainstream stuff is concerned, I kind of missed out on a lot of that, and I've been catching up on it over the past 7 years. My first ever concert that I ever went to was a Shabba Ranks concert in Virginia in the United States at the age of 9. I remember being gun searched. So that's probably my first live experience that I remember. Yeah, me and Shabba Ranks, you wouldn't exactly figure. I was obsessed. I had a whole reggae thing going on. Cool Runnings was like my favorite movie ever. It wasn't really, being into reggae at such an early age wasn't really escapism. It was just, I liked the directness of the music. I liked the kind of command that was in the performance. And I liked the rhythms. I just got it. I don't know why. I was probably more obsessed with it then than I am now. Now it just kind of, it's just like anything else to me. So I had quite a charmed and eccentric upbringing when I was living in Paris. And then things got a little bit more tricky, and we moved over to London, and I had to switch over, to going to school in London. I had a really hard time at school, especially fitting in, coming from the family that I came from, and the little cocooned atmosphere that I was brought up in Paris. Coming over to a state school here was a big shock. So I had a hard time, and it led to me actually leaving school for a little bit while I switched over to the English system. So I didn't go to school for about 6 months, but during that time I started to learn how to sing, and I got this really tough Russian singing teacher who came to train me up, because I had nothing else to do because I wasn't going to school. So I would train a couple hours a day, and each lesson that I had with her was like 2 hours long, and it was classical music that I was doing. I got very good very quickly, and within a couple of months I got my first job, which was actually in the chorus of a Strauss opera at the Royal Opera House. And one thing led to the other. Over the next few years, I did everything from, really serious contemporary music all around Europe to singing on jingles and in-flight music for British Airways. So I kind of did the gamut, but it was good. I really sharpened my teeth, and I got a lot of training at an early age. It wasn't about money, because I was being ripped off all the time, because I had no agent and no manager, and my mother and I were completely ignorant. So I think for the jingles and for the in-flight music that I did, I got paid around £50, which to me was huge. By the time I was 16 and I had done it all and my voice had broken, I had something like £2,000 in my Barclays student account, and I was really proud of it. But I didn't realize you were supposed to add a couple zeros for all the work that I had done. But all the better, because, you know, it wasn't about money. And it certainly felt like it was very hard to make money in the music industry, and that's something that I'm very glad I kind of went through at a young age. Or else I would have taken it for granted, and by the age of 16 I'd be like, yeah, it's so easy, you know, it's just... But no. Anyway, I always was writing songs at the same time as doing my classical music because I'm dyslexic and I can't sight read. So in order to play anything at the piano, I had to write my own little tunes myself. And I was always jealous of my sisters who could kind of pick up sheet music and just do anything they wanted at the keyboard. So I wrote songs from an early age, and also having trouble at school, I kind of took refuge. There was a little bit of escapism, but not really. It was more just kind of writing songs as a remedy, and I do that to this day. I write songs as a remedy to the way I'm feeling, however I'm feeling that day. Well, see, it's weird. In classical music, you spend your entire life being an interpreter. You're singing songs and you're doing material that's been done, you know, and is being done thousands and thousands and thousands of times a day by people all over the world. In pop and rock music, you're completely creating something new, and you're as good as you are original. So if the more original you are, the more kudos you have. So it's kind of, you know, polar opposites in that respect. But in classical music, once you learn the music that you're supposed to perform, you're free to do whatever you want within that interpretation. Whereas when you're making pop and rock records, it's so full of decision-making all the time. So there's actually something that's very structured about making a rock record. It's really kind of like you're constantly making decisions as to what's got to stay on the record and what's not, you know. So you kind of add on when you're recording, and then you spend days taking out. However, when you play live, you kind of undo that whole decision-making process, and you can go wherever you want, make things sound a little bit faster, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit louder. So I think there's structure and discipline in both. The only difference is one's completely about interpreting and making something your own that has been performed before, and one is actually just creating new stuff. I've had a bit of a weird journey to where I am today. I knew that I was going to be in music or in some sort of fantasy job, as I like to call it, from a really early age, from about the age of 11. You know, as soon as I did my first gig and I walked into that theater, I knew that there was another way that you could live your life. Because my dad's life was based in reality, and my life, I wanted to be based in kind of make-believe and still make a living out of it. But as I started to kind of want to take it to the next level, I tended to have to do it mostly on my own, and that wasn't by choice. That was simply because the kind of songs that I was writing, I wasn't really accepted by the indie crowd in London because I was too melodic, and I had this obsession with a 3.5-minute song, and the idea that you can do anything you want with a pop song just as long as you keep it within, you know, just kind of experimenting with the structure. Anyway, my whole idea on how to make pop or rock records, whatever you want to call them, was very different to what was going on at the moment. So the indie scene kind of rejected me, and at the same time, the commercial crowd and the record companies also rejected me because they just thought it was a little bit strange. I wrote songs about, you know, things that you're not really meant to write pop songs about because they just don't sell. I'm glad about that because it really forced me to kind of narrow down and develop my own interpretation on pop music because I had no other choice. I would try and get gigs, but no one would ever let me into their band. Even at school, I was always the one that could never get into anyone's band. I just got all the rejects, and we were always such a mess because we could never really kind of stick together. So I've kind of been doing my own thing in my own weird way for quite a while. I do a lot. When I demo just with the voice, vocal, and the piano. I don't like to kind of over-demo because I think it's very dangerous. So it took a long time for people hearing those kind of demos to have the imagination to see what could happen if I got, you know, the full budget and the support that I needed to make these big-sounding records that I make now.